The floor is mine, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I have not prepared slides, but I have prepared a text and I will try to read it to you so that I don't kind of get talking and don't find an end to it. And I would like to thank the organizers very much to creating this platform and this kind of exchange. And I feel very, very privileged and very honored to be able to say something about Loet's book. The title of Leydesdorff's book, The Evolutionary Dynamic of Discursive Knowledge, is not vain or idle or just an aspiration. I feel when I read the book and then I look back to the title, I find it very appropriate, yeah, because there's a parallelity between the breadth, the kind of the bridge Loet is creating in Loet's own academic biography, which covers the years of the rise of what Derek de Solla Price once called big science. So Loet's work is dedicated to understand knowledge dynamics, and the chapter of the book take us to any possible method or to any possible type of methods. There are, of course, many methods, but I think the book quite covers representative types of methods, which can be applied to bring this understanding of knowledge and knowledge dynamics forward. So that goes from measuring to mathematical modeling, and it goes from system theory to fundamental philosophical questions. And this is what chapter 1, as the previous speaker already so beautifully unfolded, is mainly about. So chapter 1 draws the big lines of the conceptual framework Loet operates in, and it gives us also the motivation, I found, and the why he does it. And now allow me a little side remark. So on the surface, or how to say that, in the usual expectations, if you look at academia more in an Holzschnittsartigen way, so simply an oversimplified way, the science, we are supposed to be objective, rational, we are supposed to be truth guided, right? That's what Luhmann would have said. But the science is also the work of human being, it's Menschenwerk. And I know Loet since more than 30 years, and in my Dutch new home, he became an invaluable counselor, a good friend, next to an inspiring colleague he already was. So over rijsttafels, which is an Indonesian dish, very lekker, yeah, we discussed the state of the art, the state of the state, the state of the science system, the state of society. And in this discussion, Loet's deep humanities was penetrating always what we spoke about. And the deep conviction that science is not to be done for science. It's also not to be done lightly. It needs to be dedicated to make the world better. The welfare in the Western societies, and probably in all societies, I dare say, bases on knowledge production. And society ought to take care of all of them which build it, which are part of it. So education and participation is crucial, but also freedom. Freedom is an essence, is the elixir of life of all of that. So I was deeply touched when I started reading the book, and I read in chapter 1, in the very first kind of section, systematically written up what you often had told me, Loet, in our delightful story kind of telling manner at dinner. Loet's work is rooted in the philosophical and ideological debates in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. When in Europe, I would like to remind us, we had two very different societal systems, which fought for the right path. And they fought bitterly and often dangerously. So we summon that under Cold War. And if I sometimes read kind of reflections about the Cold War, nowadays, I sometimes scratching my head and I think, oh, maybe the people who did not live in these decades are kind of thinking this was a fancy game or something like that. I'm born in 61, so I also haven't lived through the 50s, but my parents-in-law were in Berlin when there was, when it was an open Frontstadt, yeah, an open city. And they often told that they really had fears that there will be an atom bomb falling. And if it falls in Europe, it probably falls in Berlin. So I think it's important to remind ourselves to the historic context, which has shaped Loet's reflection and thinking, and he shares that with us. And I find that very, very special. So this coexistence, Cold War between two very different societal designs were also challenging, provoking. I think the scientists on both sides provoked each other. Which stream of philosophical thinking would now be the most appropriate to better understand and ultimately better act in this complex growing societies? So for me, the chapter 1, the light, next to all the rich information it brings on the different philosophical concepts and frameworks and persons you depart from Loet, one, the light is also on another level. It's you would probably call it a second order kind of level or a second order manner. Namely, that you are able to convey an argument together with elements which allow us to also have an emotional access to this argument. And yes, science history does this, but also autobiographical remarks illustrate that. So I'm really enjoyed when I read not only about your own journey, but also what you built into about the journeys of those figures you rely on. So why, when, under which circumstances they had developed a certain approach and chosen a certain kind of conceptual way. So I think this way to describe things makes it much more easier to relate, to ingest, and to reappropriate thoughts. And I found that Loet finds a very fine, masterly balance and never leaves the scientific argument out of sight. He never loses himself in sentimental memory, so it's not an autobiographical kind of going back. But suddenly, by all the seemingly mundane kind of little drops and arguments, the choice of the philosophical approaches becomes logical and convincing. And I was wondering if maybe such a culture of writing should be more promoted. Not because it is enjoyable and pleasing to read, but because without it, we are doomed to drown in the wells of literature, which we have at our fingertips. So I learned from John Erpenbeck, who is an East German philosopher, psychologist, and also a writer, and the father of Jenny Erpenbeck, who is a very known contemporary German writer. So I learned from him something which is, I think, obvious and known in psychology since ever, yeah, that we learn best when we are emotionally involved. The same John Erpenbeck also uses to emphasize the value of science history to achieve true interdisciplinarity. So we often discuss that as because we also worked in interdisciplinary settings, and he said, to teach or to introduce somebody to a concept used in a discipline aligned to the discipline this person is coming from, the best attempt is actually to tell something about the history, how this concept came about in the history of that field. And I think we all share, and we share that the more so, the more the science system keeps growing, we share the experience that sorting out terminology is at the root of any interdisciplinary collaboration. So the audience of this book is large and subdiverse, and still the chapter 1 manages, I think, to give at least everybody a lead into further literature. Sorting out this shared vocabulary is tedious. It is often no fun. I work in a lot of interdisciplinary projects and I see people doing it over and over again, and people don't get excited about sorting out each other's differences. It's also in principle simple, but not easy to be achieved, and it is still underestimated. Loet takes us with him step for step in his own sorting out process, sentence for sentence. And sometimes I stop and think, would I have chosen the same words? Do I actually agree? Would I probably use another analogy? And very often I'm just enlightened, and sometimes I'm baffled, but I'm always feel provoked in a very kind of positive manner. I write these thoughts in our Berlin flat and library, and I'm surrounded by literature, by books in Russian, German, and English on system theory and cybernetics, great designs which emerged in the first way of computerization. So if I was thinking of Nalimov in preparing this lecture, and how his book, which gave scientometrics, so the quantitative studies of science, his name, how that was influenced by his being forced to be in a gulag, in a camp in Soviet Union for many years, but he was there to actually sort out and optimize the technological processes. Those camps were also sometimes places of production, yeah. And that has triggered a lot of his kind of ideas on measurements of the sciences. So, so it is not by an accident that I'm now referring to those books from the 50s, 60s, 70s, because I sometimes I feel we live in a time where the journal article has totally taken over, and where books are sold by chapters, even your book, Loet. And where holistic approaches are more seen as something for the idle or retired or old-fashioned people, at least in a lot of fields. Yeah. But what this book also shows is that we cannot truly understand the details of a scientific argument. The nature of a phenomena we measure and observe. So take, for instance, the scientometric examples I'm familiar with, the growth of publication in a certain field, the emergence and decline of a new journal as a certain hub in a network topology, the invention of a certain drug, and when and if it is pushed to the market. We cannot understand those detailed phenomena without a larger reference frame. And I think this is what this book offers us, to embed very concrete questions, very science politically relevant questions, societal questions, into a philosophical setting. There's always a philosophical setting to our reflections, but it's often not articulated. And I like that it's here articulated. So here the book stands out, and it is kind of against the current zeitgeist. Maybe it's running prior to it. It does not avoid these philosophical epistemological questions behind any scientific exploration, and it brings them to the surface, and it articulates them and shows their consequences. And while the book is still based on articles, I think bringing them all together in a book gives us something to chew on for a long time. That's all.